Hey friends! In today's video I am going to teach you about gathering. This is a technique that you often use more for style purposes, design. For example, here's a little apron. I've made this with my students and we learned the gathering stitch. Basically when you want added fullness in something, you want it a little bit more full, then you're going to do a gathering stitch. So what happens is that you start with a bigger piece of fabric and you want this piece of fabric to be gathered up to then fit onto this smaller piece of fabric. And that's going to make this more full. So these are just sample pieces. It's not anything that I'm actually making. But this is kind of a finished product where you can see I started out with a larger rectangle that was pretty big and put in some gathering stitches, and then I fit it to fit within this waistband where I wanted it to fit. And this created, sorry it's a little wrinkled, but this created a full effect like in the skirt part of the apron. And so today I'm just going to teach you, or maybe just help some of you review. Maybe you've learned this before but you're a little rusty and you need a review. So I'm going to teach you how to do it. So we're going to leave this piece of fabric here for right now, and we're going to take our long piece of fabric over to our sewing machine where we're going to sew in 2 gathering stitches. Okay, to start with, we are going to put 2 stitching lines into the edge that we want to gather. This is our long edge. This is what we want to gather. So we're going to run 2 stitching lines down this side. Your stitching lines aren't going to be normal stitching lines. It's going to be a basting stitch, which if you remember, a basting stitch means that there's no back stitching and it's going to be the longest stitch setting that you have. So I'm going to come over here to my length and I'm going to increase that as long as it'll go, which on my machine is 4. Some other machines are 5. So the length will be at 4, and then we're going to sew 2 lines. So the first line will be on the 3/8 line. So we're going to start here at the top edge of the fabric, and like I said, no back stitching, and we're just going to run this fabric all the way down, following along on our 3/8 line. I have some long pieces there. We'll cut that later. All the way down at the beginning. We want to trim this and keep this long. We don't want to trim it to here because we want to be able to pull out our thread in just a little bit, you'll see. So cut it, keep it a few inches long. Okay, and now we can trim these long frayed pieces. I think I've meant to do the other edge, but that's okay. Okay. So now we're going to come back in here and we're going to stitch in 1 more line. Make sure that your threads here don't get tangled. I can actually trim that down to a few inches. But just make sure you keep them long. You don't want them to be short. Okay, we're going to come in here and do another stitch line, and this time we're going to go on 5/8. Our first one was at 3/8, this one's at 5/8. We're going to start right at the top, and we're going to stitch down. And as we stitch, it's very, very important that we don't intersect our lines. If you start stitching over your next stitching line, then you're not going to be able to pull up your threads to gather it. So be really, really careful that you don't cross over your other line as you're sewing. I'm just going to finish this all the way down, following along our 5/8, and remember, no back stitch. So we'll pull that out, cut it a little bit long. Now as you can see, we have 2 stitching lines, 2 long basting lines all the way down. Now we're going to go back over to our sewing table. Okay, so now I'm back over at my cutting table. I'm going to actually flip this over, and you're going to grab your 2 bobbin threads. This is just a long thread that doesn't belong there, sorry. Grab your 2 bobbin threads. Got a little bit tangled up there. Okay. you don't want your top thread to come over on that side. You have your top thread, which I did in blue, and then the bobbin is in yellow, just so you can kind of see the difference. So you're going to grab your 2 bobbin threads, and you're going to very carefully pull and just pull those gathers across. Okay? And basically, we're going to just pull it until it matches the size that we want to sew it onto, till it matches the piece that we want to sew it onto. Now you want to be really careful as you're pulling through. You don't want to pull this all the way through to the other end and pull it out over here, because it will actually like pull the thread out and you're going to lose that thread there. So what I like to do is I like to start on both ends, just to make sure that these threads end up like really long, if that makes sense. Because if you keep pulling, then these threads on the other end are going to be really short and it's going to pull all the way through. So I like to start on the other end also, because kind of this gathering here it'll stop each other as you get close together, if that makes sense. And then you won't pull your thread all the way through. So it doesn't really matter which end you work on. Either one is fine. Like I'm already here on this end, so I'll just finish on this end. But don't pull too hard or your threads will snap. And if your threads snap, then you have to go back and redo your stitching lines. And that's never fun. So we want to keep pulling until it's about the size. You can see I actually pulled a little bit too much, so we can just pull some of that out so that it matches. But also you want to make sure that your gathers are evenly distributed. So you can see right here there's no gathers, whereas right here there's a bunch of gathers. So you want to even it out so that you have an even amount of gathers all throughout your piece that you're sewing. I mean, you know what I mean, the piece that you're gathering. Okay, so it's still a little bit short, so I'm just going to let some of these gathers back out. If your piece ends up a little bit shorter, then that's what you do. You keep distributing so that it's all evenly distributed, and then you can kind of, and what I should have done, which I forgot to do, but before I gathered this, I should have folded this in half and marked a mark on my halfway point, just like marked it with a pen and then marked halfway on this, just so we can match up half and half. That way you know you don't have like 2/3 of your fabric on this half and the other third on this half. You kind of want it to be evenly spaced. But anyway, so markings are always helpful. Okay, so it's about there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take it and we're going to pin it right sides together, and we can still adjust those gathers if they don't fit exactly, but we're going to do right sides together, matching everything up. And we're going to pin. We're going to pin all the way down. And yes, it's going to be a little bit bulky. You want to pin on the gathered side, because when we take it through our machine, you want this side to be on the feed dogs and the gathers under your presser foot. It's going to be a lot easier for you. I'm going to go ahead and pin it down on this other end. That way I can just loosen it or tighten it however I need to. So you want to make sure that it's even. You don't want, gaps or anything. And it's looking like it's matching up and it fits pretty well. And if it twists up, then you can just like pull it back down flat. And however many pins you feel like you need. Some people feel like they need a lot. I tend to do a little bit more on the gathers just because it does twist up a little bit as you go. And then also, some people ask, well, can I just do this with one line? No, you really need 2 lines, and there's 2 reasons for that. you need 2 stitching lines. One is because just in case one of those threads break, like maybe you're almost at the end and one of your threads snap, you have that second thread to help you. But the other reason is that this part will kind of curl up funny if there's only one thread, and it's not going to lay down as flat when you're going to pin it all together. So you really do, it is necessary to have 2 stitching lines when you're doing a gathering. And now we're just going to take it back to our machine and stitch it together. Okay, so now I'm back at my machine. Don't forget to change your length back, because now we're doing a stitch. We're not doing a basting stitch, we're doing a regular stitch. So your threads are kind of going to be in your way here for a little bit. That's okay. You want to get this under your machine. And on your seam allowance, we're doing 5/8. So we're going to start under here, and this time we are going to back stitch. Okay. And we're going to follow along until we get to the end. Now you'll notice that for whatever reason, the stitch is going inside that basting stitch, so it's going to be showing, the basting stitch is going to be showing on the other end, on the other side when we're done. And so basting stitches are designed to take out when you're done, the same like with the gathering, because it's a basting stitch. We can take that stitch out at the very end when we're done, and then we won't see. So it doesn't matter if it's on the inside or outside of the seam allowance, because we're going to take it out. But we're just following down on our 5/8. And just take it as slow as you need to make sure that this fabric doesn't get like twisted up in here. You know, you want it to stay pretty even here. And I always take out my pins as I go, because sometimes disaster strikes when you run over pins. And we're going to go all the way to the end and back stitch. And now we can trim. Like I said, this is how it looks when we're done. Okay, now you can see these basting stitches that we put in there for the gathers. So like I said, you can come in here and grab those basting threads. Make sure it's your basting thread and not your real thread, your real stitch. But you can come in here and you can like pull it out. So, and trim up, and then you can like trim up all of these threads. But you can actually just pull these out now because it's all sewn together, so it doesn't really matter. So just pick this out whatever way works for you. I have another video on the best way to take out seams, the best way to seam rip, so you can follow that. But you can just come in here, whoops, you can just come in here and you can pick out your basting lines. Sometimes I get lazy and I don't bother, but for sure you want to pick out those lines that you can see on the other side, because you don't want to see it on the other side. So make sure you do that. So you'll come in here and you're going to iron your gathers upward toward the waistband or whatever it is that you're sewing it onto. You just iron that up. So when you're gonna feel like you're ironing wrinkles in, and it's okay because it's gathered. And so then you can see on the other side that it's getting ironed. You want that to be flat. Okay. And that, my friends, is how you gather. You can see this cute little gather. See, it looks like a little apron or skirt. But that's all there is to it. You can see that we ironed it all up. We ironed this back side up towards the waistband or whatever part you're sewing it to. And you can see also that I took out the basting stitch. You don't see that basting line anymore. Those are just some loose threads that can be pulled out. But you see that the basting stitch is no longer there. So that's all there is to gathering. It's not too hard. Make sure to check my website and my YouTube channel for other tutorials and tips on everything that you need to know about sewing. So have fun, and I'll see you next time.